Hello and welcome. I'm Varnadoe, here to discuss one of my favorite topics, and that is negotiating. Negotiating takes place in nearly every real estate transaction, and whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market, plays a big role in the way that we approach negotiating. I want us to look at proactive steps for agents and buyers, tips for completing the purchase and sale agreement, and for handling any negotiations that may take place after a binding agreement has been formed. Before we dive in, I do want to take a moment to talk about brokerage relationships. Here in Georgia, there is an act known as BRETA. BRETA stands for Brokerage Relationships and Real Estate Transactions Act, and it applies to all licensees here in Georgia. One of the key functions of BRETA is it does require that a client relationship be set forth in writing. It makes a very distinct difference between a customer and a client. For example, a customer is a party that we're working with that we can perform ministerial tasks for, versus a client, which is a party that we do represent, that we can offer counsel, advice through our knowledge and our expertise. So go ahead and have a conversation with parties up front about the difference between a client and a customer. And in most cases, buyers are going to want that client relationship, and we can establish that through signing a buyer brokerage agreement with the buyer. I also want to talk about contract forms. There are two primary sets of contract forms available to agents here in Georgia. The first one is the Georgia Association of Realtor, or what we call GAR contract forms, that are available to active board members and non-board members who have purchased a license to use the forms at forms.garealtor.com. I cannot tell you enough how much I encourage the GAR forms. They're updated annually, and they go to much greater lengths to protect the parties, the brokers involved, than any other set of contract forms I have ever seen. And if you only do one transaction this year, I promise you these forms are well worth it. Also keep in mind that listing agents most likely are going to be using GAR forms, and we want to set ourselves up and our buyers up for success from the very beginning. And if we make an offer on an RE form, even if the seller loves all the terms, there's a really good chance that the listing agent may take those terms and move them over to a GAR form, only delaying the acceptance of the contract. In a seller's market, we want to set ourselves up to have an offer that can be accepted as quickly as possible, because homes simply are going under contract very quickly. A lot of sellers are seeing multiple offers. Now, if it's a cash buyer, I really want to encourage that cash buyer to have proof of funds ready to go from the beginning. That way we can provide those along with our offer to the seller. And if it's a buyer that is seeking mortgage financing, seriously consider being pre-approved. Talk to your lender. There's a big difference between being pre-qualified and pre-approved. And if you have that pre-approval letter that you can provide along with the offer, it goes a long way with sellers and listing agents and just makes your offer so much stronger. Highly recommend being pre-approved. Now let's move forward and talk about the purchase and sale agreement itself. And one question that buyers oftentimes have is, what price should I offer for the home? Let's take a look at solds in the area. Really important to pull a CMA for a buyer the same way that we would for a seller. And if you've never taken a look at the absorption report analysis that is available in FMLS, take a few minutes to check it out. I think you will love it. If you're on the homepage of FMLS and you hover over products on the top toolbar, you're going to see absorption report analysis there. This gives you an opportunity to see the big picture. It gives you an opportunity to see how many homes are currently on the market, the days of inventory, list price to sold price. Great data to have, in addition to a quick CMA. A quick CMA is going to show you what the home sold for. It's going to show you any closing costs that a seller paid. And these are all things that a buyer is going to want to take into consideration when they make their offer. And in a seller's market, it's not uncommon for a buyer to actually offer a little bit more or more than what the home is currently listed for, especially if most homes are going for 100% or close to 100% of the list price. I also want to talk about earnest money. Earnest money is probably one of the number one overlooked items in a purchase and sale agreement by both buyers and sellers. And sellers should really consider requiring more earnest money. I know it's standard in our industry, 1% of the purchase price, but sellers should know that this will be their liquidated damages. If the buyer fails to close on the transaction, they are limited to the earnest money. And the more earnest money a buyer puts forth, the more confidence they are showing in their ability to move forward and close on the deal. So more earnest money definitely makes the offer stronger. Let's also talk about non-refundable earnest money. A buyer may also elect to offer non-refundable earnest money, which shows confidence in their offer. Now, the Georgia Association of Realtors does offer a library of special stipulations, including several on earnest money that could be easily inserted into special stipulations of the contract. There's also option money. Option money is located on the first page of the GAR contract right below due diligence. Now, option money is money that is paid directly to the seller that may be applied toward the buyer's purchase price at closing. It's only refundable to the buyer in the event of seller default. This is an item that we customarily don't use, but might want to consider using, especially in multiple offer situations when a seller has called for highest and best. It definitely will strengthen an offer, and just like more earnest money, shows confidence in the offer itself. Keep time frames concise. For example, if a buyer is already pre-approved, they could certainly shorten the number of days that they have for their financing contingency. They might even could have 0 days for financing and simply keep the appraisal contingency portion of the contract in place. Keep special stipulations to a minimum in a seller's market for sure. The less stipulations, generally, the easier it is for a seller to go ahead and accept that contract, keeping everything as clean as possible. Now, I know for you and I, a real estate transaction is simply a business deal. Simply a business deal for most of us, but for buyers and sellers, it can be very personal. Have you ever heard of a buyer love letter? A buyer who's in love with the property may consider writing down a couple of paragraphs, expressing their interest in the property, what it is about the property that has attracted them to it, their appreciation for the property, how much they would love to be able to call that property home. This can go a long way, and we're talking about making our offer stand out. A buyer love letter is definitely one way to do it. Now, in most cases, negotiations do not end upon binding agreement date. It'd be great if it did, but usually there are a few items that may come up prior to closing, and one that most frequently comes up, yes, I'm talking about the amendment to address concerns, which arises after many buyers have a home inspection. If a home inspection comes back and a buyer sees issues in that report, they may want to ask the seller to make repairs to the property. And I really want to set proper expectations with buyers and really want to ask buyers to limit their requests to only those items that they cannot live without, to only big ticket items, if at all possible, because in a seller's market, a seller may very well have other offers waiting in the wings. So they may not be as motivated to agree to make repairs to the property as they would be in another situation in a buyer's market, perhaps because they know that if this deal doesn't go through, perhaps they have several more that they could go with. Now, instead of asking for repairs, another strategy might be to simply request a reduction in the purchase price. This oftentimes leads to happier buyers and sellers. At the end of the day, most of us can agree that a reduction in purchase price is a reduction in purchase price versus repair items where it may be a buyer that's simply not satisfied with the way that the repairs were done, even if the seller did exactly what they were required to do per the amendment to address concerns. We hope that you found these tips helpful. I want to thank you all for watching, and I also want to thank you for being a valuable member of our Solid Source family.